Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the Plum Island Horror from GMT Games. This is designed by my good friend Hermann Luttmann with graphics provided by Terry Leeds. The game is for 1 to 4 players, ages 14 and up, plays in around 45 minutes per player, and is rated by GMT Games as low complexity and very high solitaire suitability. This carries an MSRP of $95, but I have to mention, as of me sharing this video, this is not in stock at the GMT Games website. But I've got some good news. It is going to be back in stock at the end of the month. So if you have any interest in picking it up, act quickly when it arrives back in stock. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Plum Island Horror. A few things I want to mention before we jump on in. First of all, my friends over at GMT Games provided me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important that you know that. This is also not a how-to-play video for a couple of reasons. Number one, I guarantee there's at least one really detailed how-to-play video floating around out there for the Plum Island Horror. And second, in 2024, I am trying to shorten my review videos because, yes, I understand I have a tendency to ramble on. Lastly, want to be completely transparent here. Hermann Luttmann is a good friend of mine. In fact, he's one of my absolute favorite people in the industry. I want you to know that. But most of you watching this video and Hermann himself do understand I always shoot straight with my reviews, regardless of the relationship I have with that game's designer. Okay, so what is the premise of the Plum Island Horror? So what's going on here is that Plum Island is on the east coast of the U.S., and this hurricane blows through, kind of devastates the island. And this is a populated island. And it's also the home of a top secret research facility that's got these mysterious chemicals and compounds and things like that. And the facility is damaged. These chemicals are released and kill a lot of people. A lot of people take dirt naps, but they're not napping for long because these chemicals also reanimate them. And now they are these monstrous horrors who are hell-bent on killing the living. And then, of course, they will end up rising from the dead and joining the ranks of the horrors. The players are leading different factions of individuals and groups on the island in defense of the island, as well as attempting to evacuate citizens from the island. So essentially, there are 3 ways to lose the game. You automatically lose if the biohazard level reaches a certain point. And we actually use a biohazard bag and cubes, and we will be putting different colored cubes in this bag: green, yellow, and red. Red is bad, green is okay. And as we will draw cubes, either during a round or because of an event card, we are going to keep boosting up the biohazard level. Now, there are ways for us to try to clean up the biohazards from the island to drop that track back down. We also have overrun areas. And as you can see on the board here, we have 6 different tracks. This is spawning area. So where mostly the horrors are going to spawn. And then we have arrows that lead down. This is the direction that these horrors are going to move. And they are going to attack units that are in these areas. And if they get all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to flip this up because this is actually a pretty tall board. I can't get all of it into the shot. When they reach down to these areas here, these areas will become overrun, and they are worth overrun points. If these areas get overrun, those points will get ticked off on the track. If we reach a certain point on that track, we automatically lose. Now we have this bridge here. This bridge is super important. If this gets overrun, we are in deep, deep trouble. We also start the game off with areas of the island damaged. So we have damaged bridges that need to be repaired. Our power is out. We have to repair the island-wide light and power. So there's a lot of different things that are taking place in the game. Last way that we lose is if we go through all 3 days, all 9 rounds, because the game is broken up into 3 days of 3 rounds each. If we hit the final round, we finish that up, we have not evacuated enough evacuation points of citizens, we will lose then too. So let's talk about the component quality, because it is excellent as we expect from GMT Games. The rule book, as well as the reference guide, really well put together and super easy for me to understand playing the Plum Island Horror. I will also point out that Hermann Luttmann is the designer of one of my absolute favorite games, Dawn of the Zeds. This does share some design DNA with Dawn of the Zeds. I'll talk a little bit about that when I share some final thoughts and give this a review score. But because I'm familiar with Dawn of the Zeds, it was even easier for me to jump on in and understand how to play, because Dawn of the Zeds has tracks as well. It's a defensive game. So it was very easy to slide right on into the Plum Island Horror. All of the different mats that we have are nicely presented. And this map, this board, this mounted board is excellent. Love the artwork throughout. It's got kind of a comic book look to it. All the artwork for the various different faction units, very nicely done. Also has kind of a comic book art flavored to it. Should also point out, this is a horror game, but it also has a sense of humor. And when I show you one of the faction mats, I'll give you some examples, but tongues are firmly implanted in cheeks with the Plum Island Horror. So the cards are really nice thick card stock with those. I would definitely recommend, though, that you sleeve your cards. This is not an easy game to win. In my opinion, I think it's easier to win than Dawn of the Zeds, but this is still a challenging game. We also have these different drawstring bags. They're really nice too. We've got custom dice. These are custom combat dice. They are not cut dice. This looks like to be silk screened on, but they should hold up fairly well. And then we also have standees for our different faction units as well as our mutated horrors. And we have stands for those too. So everything really, really nicely done. I'm going to zoom in. We're going to take a look at one of the factions, and I'll talk a little bit about the gameplay. Let's take a look at a faction mat. And as an example, this is the Plum Island Constabulary. It's the police force. The mat is going to have all of the various different units, and these units aren't just individuals. These are groups of people, or in this case, Chase the police dog, which is a bit of a nod back to Pickles the dog in Dawn of the Zeds. These are actually groups of people, and the named person is just the person people remember from that group, or maybe they were the person who showed the greatest bravery during this crisis, things along those lines. So just keep in mind, it's not just individual people. So we have different factors for each of the units. We have close combat, ranged combat, bravery, authority, movement, hits. All of that is located on not only the mats, but also the unit standees too. So very, very convenient. Only thing that's not on the standee, special abilities that the units have, as well as their starting location in the game. Now, there are some units that will not be on the board at the beginning of the game that you have to actually bring onto the board. Not for most of the factions, though. Most of the factions, you'll actually start off with all these units except for your compound on the board. And the compound is essentially your headquarters. Now, the police have a paddy wagon, which is actually mobile. But normally, the faction compound is set in a specific location where it gets built. it doesn't move. We're going to see these horrors, these murders of horrors, which are basically stacks of counters, move down from their spawning area as they activate different tracks. And when they hit different locations, if there are civilians there or if there are faction units there, there will be close combat. If you see a civilian unit get gobbled up, you'll actually add a counter to that stack. So these stacks can grow really big, really fast, and become unstoppable juggernauts. You need to whittle those down to have any chance for success. This is a highly, highly cooperative game. And when you have multiple players, it really will work better if you discuss what's going on even during other people's turns, because there are ways to set other factions up for success who might be coming later on in the turn. Talking about the turn, we have a draw bag that we're actually going to put tokens in for the factions that are taking part in the game, as well as we've got fate tokens and we have an event card token. So as an example, let's say I draw the police, which is my faction. I get to activate them. Now, depending on the day and the time of day, will determine how many action points I will get. Could be as few as 1, could be as many as 3. Usually you're going to have 3. So one of the first things I can do with an action point is move a unit based on their movement rate. So that's how many areas I can move with that. I can also look to repair an area. As I mentioned, we have bridges that are damaged. We have power station that's out. They have to be repaired. They have damage points that we have a repair table we'll roll against. Also have location actions. A lot of these locations will have these icons, which allow you to do different things. You can search, you can heal. We have helipads because we've got helicopters. We've got a couple of helicopters that are NPC units, so we can move between helipads. And we can also evacuate civilians by way of helicopter. So those helipads come into play in that respect. We have biohazard areas where we can actually clean up some of the biohazard, which can lower that biohazard track. We also have the searching for supplies. So we have search cards, which are good for us. And we can get supplies. We can also get other things. We can get new VIP civilian units, which are going to help boost those evacuation points if we can get them off the board. We have VIP civilians that have special abilities as well. So we may not necessarily be just evacuating them. They might help us do things. We have units that are not civilian units that can come into play. And then, of course, we can get supplies. We can get additional weapons. There are a lot of things going on with these search cards. So as an example here, trapped office staff, which gets us some new VIPs, and we place a supply. And it's kind of cool because we have these different search locales. So when we search in that location, if something turns up, it ends up in that location. So this is one of the ways that no two games are ever the same, because these VIP units, these VIP civilians, things like that, they're going to be popping up in different areas. There's even a shout out to me with one of the civilian units. It's Jiffy Jeff's Auto Services. I had to laugh. So we've got all different stuff going on. And they also provide a bit of a narrative to the game. So as you're playing, as you're drawing these different cards, we're going to see a narrative form. And of course, we also have the various different actions and combat, things like that. That's also going to add to the narrative. So I can use my points to perform actions. Something else that's interesting, even if I'm not an active faction, at the end of a faction's turn, I can do what's known as follow, which will allow me to perform an action with one of my units. It cannot perform the special ability of that unit. I need to spend action points on that when it's my turn. But we get all of The other actions can be performed, and we can also reposition. So repositioning allows us to move some of these NPC units to set up other factions later in the turn or early in the next turn for success. Now, we also have the Fate token, which will have us draw a Fate card. And the Fate card is going to show us 4 different things. First, we're going to spawn a Murder of Horrors on a track. So that's the track we would spawn a small stack of horrors. Then we also activate tracks. So if we have horrors on any of the active tracks, then they are going to move. So depending on the size of the stack as well as the time of day will determine how far they move. Now, of course, anytime a horror moves into an area that's got a faction unit or civilians, it is going to stop and close combat will take place. Close combat is something that we don't want to really get stuck into too often because not only are we going to be taking hits, we're also going to see the biohazard jump. So we're going to put more cubes into that bag because every time we have exposure to these horrors, we are exposing people to these biohazards. So I thought that's a cool aspect of the game too. We have ranged combat. As an action, we can engage in combat if we have a ranged combat rating, or if we have a unit that doesn't normally have ranged combat, but we have found weapons and they carry those weapons, we can attack a stack of horrors that's adjacent to us, and we roll a number of combat dice equal to their ranged combat. In close combat, we would roll combat dice equal to their close combat rating. So as an example here, we would get a hit because in ranged combat, a shield counts as a hit, and a half hit, which doesn't get us anything. 2 half hits equal a hit, and that is a regular hit. We also have critical hits. So critical hits are good for 2 hits. You just simply get rid of 2 of those. Single hit, get rid of 1. That counts in ranged combat as a single hit. In close combat, that allows us to ignore a hit. So depending on the number of horrors in the stack and the terrain will determine how many hits we take in close combat. But we also have mutated horrors that could also be adding ranged rolls or close combat rolls. But the stacks of horrors do not use dice. We have specific numbers that are based on the number in the stack as far as the hits they're going to dish out. Something else we see on these fate cards, are we going to draw an event card? So event cards are bad. So when we draw fate cards, we have to look to see, are we going to draw an event card? Could say no, could say yes, you are going to draw one. Then we also have a random number because as you notice, our 6-sided dice do not have numbers on them. They are custom combat dice. So there are times that we need to find a random number from 1 to 6. And that's how we get it. We draw from the fate deck. Now, could we roll a 6-sided die with pips? Yeah, I suppose so. I don't really see much changing. Although, there are just a certain number of each of the random numbers in here. All depends. Personally, I would just draw the card like the rules state. Then we also have event cards. There is a token that can be drawn from the bag, which tells us to draw an event card. And of course, when we draw the fate cards, we might have to draw an event card. Event cards are pretty much always bad. Always going to be something that we don't want happening. So as an example here, we've got overflowing horrors. So we check any tracks that don't have at least 1 stack of horrors. And if it doesn't have a stack, we're going to create a stack in that spawning area. We have cards that will actually move stacks of horrors to new tracks. So we have some, that's what these arrows represent there. These are areas that can be crossed over. So of course, if we had the stack here and we've got Frank Drebin Over here, you would think, well, he's pretty safe. Well, we have event cards, which will move that on over to attack civilians and or faction units. So we are going to go through the 9 different rounds, and we are going to attempt to do everything we can to eliminate these horrors and prevent them from spreading biohazard as well as overrunning locations, while at the same time trying to evacuate civilians in order to grab those evacuation points. And then at the end of those 9 rounds, we are going to see, did we evacuate enough people? Because if we didn't, we are going to lose. So that in essence is an overview of the Plum Island Horror. There's a lot of other things going on, especially with different NPC units and things along those likes. But for the most part, that's pretty much the main gist. So let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I have to say that I am a big fan of just about all of Hermann Luttmann's game designs, and they always tend to be pretty unique. Now, even though this shares design DNA with Dawn of the Zeds, this is a rather different game than Dawn of the Zeds. Now, as far as one aspect of many of Hermann Luttmann's game designs, which I happen to enjoy, you're going to find a lot of in the Plum Island Horror, is chaos. So we never know what's going to activate when, especially at the beginning of a round, because we're reaching on into that draw bag. We may pull out a faction token, so we get to activate a faction. Hooray! We may pull out a fate tokens. That means we got to flip over a fate card. Boo! And we may have to flip over an event card. Bigger boo. So we never know exactly what's going to be taking place during any given round. I also like the biohazard bag because unlike other games where certain situations would arise, we'd know, okay, well, we're going to move the biohazard track so many points. You reach into that biohazard bag, you don't know what you're going to pull out. Now you can start having a pretty good idea because you're seeding that bag with different cubes, but you might luck out and pull out green cubes, which means you don't have to move the track at all. Or you could pull out red cubes, which are 2 points each, which means that track could be moving a whole lot. So I like that quite a lot as well. While this is a horror game, this is not a horrific game. So that's important to keep in mind too, because Dawn of the Zeds is a zombie game, and it tends to be pretty grisly and gruesome, and some of the artwork on the cards is pretty bloody. In this case, none of that. So you've got a much wider audience that you can play the Plum Island Horror with. Even though it is a horror game, there are these monstrous undead creatures attacking. It's got a sense of humor to it as well. And I really do dig the sense of humor. Herman and I are in the same age range, so I caught almost every one of those references that are being made in the game, which makes me chuckle. A lot of people out there are probably wondering, how does this stack up to Dawn of the Zeds? Because I'm a huge fan of Dawn of the Zeds. It's probably my absolute favorite zombie game that I own. Something I'll point out immediately is the Plum Island Horror isn't as clunky in some ways as the most recent edition of Dawn of the Zeds, because there are some design elements in 3rd edition Dawn of the Zeds which did not come from the mind of Hermann Luttmann. They were added by the powers that be at Victory Point Games at the time. So they don't really mesh as well as far as gameplay as I would like. We don't see that with the Plum Island Horror. Now, having said that, I don't feel the Plum Island Horror provides as much of a narrative story at the end of a game as you would find with Dawn of the Zeds, because Dawn of the Zeds has a lot of events that take place that you would see in zombie movies. So once you finish up a game of Dawn of the Zeds, doesn't matter if you won or lost, you have a story in your mind that you can easily relate. Now, Plum Island Horror tends to be a bit more abstract than that, which is fine. but you just don't have that same sort of narrative. I love how the Plum Island Horror meshes all the various different mechanics work really, really well together. It is loads and loads of fun. I do have one little quibble, and it is something that actually was also in Dawn of the Zeds, and that is with ranged attacks. You have to spend supplies for most of your ranged attacks. Like in Dawn of the Zeds, you had to spend ammo for your ranged attacks. And the reality is, I think it artificially curtails the ranged attacks that can take place, because ranged attacks can be very powerful. You don't take any hits because you're not in the same area as the horrors, and you don't have to worry about biohazard cubes because you're not exposed. So I think having to spend supply points for most of the ranged attacks is going to lead players to make fewer ranged attacks. And honestly, this takes place in the United States. This is a country where we have millions upon millions of firearms in private ownership. Come on, really? It's that difficult to find ammunition? So that's like a minor quibble. I'm going to guess there are people out there who are wondering how I feel this compares to Dawn of the Zeds. Do I like the Plum Island Horror better than Dawn of the Zeds? I would have to say that I enjoyed the Plum Island Horror just a smidgen less than Dawn of the Zeds for a couple of different reasons. Number one, Dawn of the Zeds was pretty revolutionary, and it really did change the whole States of Siege line of games from Victory Point Games, even though it wasn't really a States of Siege game. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It was a States of Siege game, even though it didn't carry that moniker on it. So Dawn of the Zeds, to me, was very revolutionary, very different. The Plum Island Horror, as I've already pointed out, does share design elements from Dawn of the Zeds. So I don't feel it's as revolutionarily different as Dawn of the Zeds was. It's still a fantastic game, don't get me wrong. It's just not as original as Dawn of the Zeds. I do feel it plays a lot cleaner than the most recent edition of Dawn of the Zeds, simply because it's a single designer, single vision, and it is put right there in front of you in the gameplay. Love that. Production quality, top notch, as we've come to expect from GMT Games as well. But as far as a review score, I would say I'm going to give this a review score just a tiny bit less than my favorite edition of Dawn of the Zeds. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Plum Island Horror a 9 out of 10. I think it is that good. It is excellent. I highly recommend it. Little quibbles, but nothing major. And I honestly think if you play solitaire or if you enjoy cooperative games, especially with the horror aspect, this is a must own. It has to be in your collection when it arrives back in print at the end of this month. So there's that too. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It will not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, The Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central, right here on YouTube. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.